Welcome to another episode of the Launch Lab podcast. I'm with Riaz today, and we are going to cover the topic of building product, talking to you the growing, and I would even say leadership. Riaz, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, I'm Riaz Kanani. I'm the CEO and founder of Radiate B2B. We're a sales and marketing SaaS platform for B2B companies that sell to enterprise. What we do is we look for activity across the internet and figure out which companies are spending time on the sorts of activities that our clients care about, what our clients sell. And so they get a list of companies that they can then follow up on and have timely conversations with them.
So if you could just make a practical example in
Of course.
Practically, who would it appeal to? Because for me it's a bit theoretical. Yeah. If you can help me out to understand.
Sure. So let's say we've got a client that sells social media platforms.
Okay.
What we can see is which companies are looking for social media platforms today across the internet.
Okay.
And so we do it based on their browsing activity. So we can't track the individuals, but we can track at a company level and identify that, let's say, HSBC is currently spending an awful lot of time looking at social media platforms. And so we tell our client that they should probably pick up the phone and have a conversation with HSBC.
And how would you benefit by intervening? Is it by reducing or by
So today, the big change in the market for the last decade, sales and marketing has mostly been about waiting for companies to come to your website and interacting with you. And so most marketing automation platforms, CRM platforms, start really from the point of when somebody comes to your website. But in the last 4 or 5 years, people are much more digitally savvy. They've grown up with the internet, and they now spend nearly 90% of all their time actually away from the vendor website. And they're actually spending activity, engaging, talking, discussing outside of the client's view, if you like. We call it the dark funnel. And so if you are a vendor today, waiting for someone to come to your website inevitably means that your competitors have got a head start on you because they've started conversations earlier. And so what we're doing is basically shining a light on that dark funnel so that our clients know that these companies are actually spending time talking about and researching particular topics. And that might be relevant to our clients, who then from a sales and marketing perspective might want to go and reach out and engage with those companies.
So just to make it clear, it's kind of marketing.
It's a sales and marketing platform designed for small or mid-sized companies selling to enterprise.
Okay, perfect. Can you tell us a bit more about your
My background?
Your background, how you came up to Radiate, and you're also a Launch Lab members. So if you can also talk.
Of course.
Entrepreneurship journey.
I guess my first ever company was at 16, so I've always been building companies. I got into the internet when the internet launched, so set up an internet consultancy, got into radio, built an internet radio station, built video advertising networks, built an email platform. And so for 2/3 of my career, I've spent building companies. We had a couple of exits over that period. And I then took a break and said I wouldn't do any more startups. And actually during that period was when I came to Cass Business School to do an MBA. And actually at the end of the MBA, I basically said, you know what, I'm actually going to go back and do another startup. And that's what eventually turned into Radiate B2B.
Would you see yourself as a serial entrepreneur?
I see myself as somebody who likes to build things and solve problems. But yes, certainly technically I'm a serial entrepreneur.
I would like to shift gears and now focus a bit more on the content side and maybe sharing your experience. If we could focus on the building product part. You are a marketing company. But I do believe that you are exposed to a lot of product of your clients.
Yeah.
How first did you come up with the idea for Radiate? Like and how did you determine the key features?
When it comes to ideation and building a startup, I've mentored lots of startups over the years, and there's a phrase that often comes up, which is, do I need the big idea? And there's a certain group of people who may get one big idea in their life and that's it. Or they think they're going to get one big idea. And then there's another group of people who just seem to have ideas. And I'm definitely in that latter category. At any one moment in time, I've got half a dozen things I would love to be building. And the hard thing for me is to make sure I don't
Stay focused.
Yeah, just keep focus on the one thing. And so when I started to think about building a new startup, we actually played with 6 or 7 different, I call them projects.
Okay.
And they're in different areas, all growth areas. So I typically work at the cutting edge of tech, so I'm always looking at where I think tech is going, and being a part of the groups that are discussing those innovations. And so we had 2 or 3 great little projects that was getting good feedback in terms of the idea and the concepts. So talking to the market, talking to potential customers, getting some feedback around the idea. And 12 months in, we then started to say, well, okay, look, we've got these different ideas, but actually let's pick one, let's focus on one and go deeper. And one of those was Radiate B2B, and this idea that the buyer is changing. And when we went and talked to marketing directors about that, what we realized was not only was the buyer changing, but the cost of acquiring customers was rocketing. And we felt that, and there's an example I use, which is the oil sands in Canada. It's only economical above $100 a barrel. Below that, makes a loss. With the acquisition costs going up in marketing, the techniques that we're able to use wouldn't have been economical back 10 years ago when the cost of acquisition was lower. Okay. But now we can use more techniques, more investment, and they actually will deliver better results as a result.
So you are saying that the way you got the idea is basically by listening?
Yeah, you listen to the customer, you listen to the market, you play with new tech and new ideas, and you have beliefs that you follow, right? So it's what you're passionate about to a degree, what you know about.
We haven't yet mentioned the topic of user behavior, but it is very related to your field. How would you translate this into your activity?
As Radiate?
As Radiate, yes.
So for us, I mean, obviously we pull together a huge amount of company activity, but we obviously have users using our platform. I think the interesting thing here is talking to users about what they want versus what their behavior actually is. They often don't align.
Can you repeat that?
So when you talk to people face to face, when you send them surveys, and when you watch behavior of what they actually do, all 3 can be different. Surveys, typically aspirational. This is what I actually think I should be doing, and therefore that's what I'm going to say. In terms of when you're talking, interviewing to somebody, this is what I want to be heard. This is what I think you want to hear. And then user behavior is what actually they're doing. And so you have to accommodate for all those 3 different situations when you're collecting data and then interpreting, because you can very easily build a system or a platform that is made for something that actually people don't do.
Now, practically, how do you filter those informations? How do you make the difference between the data from a survey that you know that, oh, he's exaggerating, data from...
So most of it depends where you are in the startup. So at the very beginning of the startup, you don't have a platform, you don't have the ability to monitor behavior of a user very easily. There are exceptions. And so a lot of your insight is coming from conversations and from surveys at that point in time. And that's difficult. And you have to always be aware in that scenario of who you're talking to. Because you talk to a lot of people when you're first starting up, and a lot of people will have opinions. So know your audience, know where they're coming from. Is important. But as you get further along and you have a platform and you can see that behavior, then you have to start to know your source. So where does that data come from, that piece of information? Make sure you understand that. But then alongside that, the direction of your business, of your startup, most commentary is around listen to your customer. As a startup in an innovative space, that almost certainly does not work. You shouldn't ignore it, you should always be listening, but most people who are going to use your product will spend very little time thinking about the future of your product. They may have some immediate desires that they want you to build, but the long-term direction, they probably never gave it a moment's thought. And so to bet your company on the future vision of the business based on very short-term feedback is dangerous. And so you have to balance that viewpoint with your own knowledge, insight that may come from yourself, your vision, it may come from innovation, it may come from analysts, but you have to pull in lots of different sources of information to know what your vision is.
How, in your case, did you do that work? How did you start it without any behavioral analysis, but mainly by listening to customer? How did you do it?
So we had a couple of advantages that most startups in the space wouldn't have had, which is our backgrounds. So I've spent 20-something years building MarTech platforms already. I've seen a couple of the cycles that happen, so I know how the market works. And so that gives me an edge. I understand the tech, we play with the tech, so we know where we think the tech is going. So that's one side. The other side was, I knew all of that and didn't really pay very much attention to what the value in that initially, until we started to talk to the marketing directors on the ground. And when we started to talk to the marketing directors on the ground, we started to hear about the problems they face. And what we realized was what we thought was happening here could actually match with what the problems or the solutions that we can solve over here. We could build something that would help both environments or both pieces of feedback. And that created Radiate.
So it was more your insight and experience matching with a kind of a problem that you encountered.
So yes, so
it's not like a premeditated move. It was like more you kind of stumble into an opportunity. Is it?
No, yes and no. So you have to have the initial thought. So we have the initial hypotheses that there's something here. Okay. You talk to the market, they say something, and it aligns or it doesn't align. And then you start to, in our case, we started to put together some wireframes and some examples and get some feedback there. And then eventually you move to building a product.
We are just talking about the building product part. I'd like to now just transition on the last part you said, talking to users, because it's a part I think, it's at least that's how I see the startup world, is like most of the things are made of, if you just use your common sense, usually you'll be right, but it's just so hard, even the little details like talking to users. Everyone knows how to talk, but how do you actually talk to users? What's the difference between a casual conversation that you have and the conversations that you'd have with a potential user? How do you filter those data?
So, what do you mean by common sense?
Because when you mean like talking to users, if I don't know anything about a field, like let's say Radiate, I would like to start something on marketing. The first thing I would do is talking to people who knows.
Sure.
So that I assume everyone would do that, or at least 90%. But now the key difference between you and I is that we will both talk to users, but the way we are gonna filter the questions we are gonna be asked. So essentially we are all gonna do the same thing, but it will be really in the details. So that will change everything. And can you focus on those details? Like in your experience, how do you talk to users? What is a good and a bad way of doing it? What are the mistakes? And
so, I mean, you have conversations with users, and those conversations maybe, I tend to prefer to keep them broad. I tend not to try and make it specific, because I want to know what their feelings are towards a particular problem or a particular issue. I'm not looking for the person to solve the problem for me. That's my job. That's what I will do. If they have got an emotional need to solve something, or there's something troubling them, or there's some issue that they have, if I have a solution, then they're going to be interested in listening to what I have to say. And so initially, I'm not coming to pitch to them about a solution I have. I'm looking to understand what are their problems, what are the key issues that they are facing today. Because if I understand that, I can frame my product in lots of different ways. But if I understand what their problems are, then I can frame my product in a way that solves their problem. And that's the first step, right? So that's the first thing that I always try to do. The second thing that I always try to do is dangerous, I find, because more often than not, the response that I will get is, yes, that sounds great. I'd love to take a look at that. The fact that they've already given up their time to speak to you means that there is a feeling of positivity towards you in the first place. And so they're already inclined, they're already positively aligned towards you. So they're going to give you positive feedback. They might give you some minor negatives, but for the most part, that doesn't happen. And so you have to take those things with a pinch of salt. I remember, for example, and especially in the early days of a startup, if your startup is going to be something that is big, that's going to change the market, actually, when you first having those conversations, a lot of people will think you're stupid. I remember talking to a very, very senior person in the industry, marketing industry, who I respect hugely. And this is nothing against that person. This is just exactly showing you the response that you can sometimes get, which is, I said, we're going to be working in the account-based marketing industry. Now, today, the account-based marketing industry became one of the most hyped areas. 7 years ago, the person literally laughed at me and said, that's a bit niche, isn't it, Riaz? Are you going to be able to build a business out of that smaller market? And again, it goes back to what I said earlier about knowing that people don't look that far ahead. That's not their job. Usually their job is to look far ahead for their business. Their job isn't to figure out where marketing tech is going over the long term. And so they don't look to those trends. Whereas you, as the startup founder, that's exactly what you're trying to do, is to try and figure out where do you think the big change in the market's going to be, and then to build towards it.
You used 2 times the word feeling. I find it very interesting. Why did you reference any feeling? Isn't it the whole point of shouldn't it be mathematical? Like, okay, you have this pain, this is what I find it interesting. Why have you used the word feeling?
So typically by the time you have got to the stage where it's logical or completely mapped out as being the problem, it's too late. It's usually what you're trying to address, and even if you aren't too late, just because logically there is something there, people don't behave logically, they behave emotionally. That's the underlying reason why people take action. I need to get rid of this because it's a problem for me. It's painful, and that happens both as an individual at home. It also happens in work.
Would you say that you should look, if you were to solve a problem, try to solve an emotional pain instead of a rational one?
Always. Always. In the business world, you need. The business world, I think, is harder, because in the business world, you still need to solve that emotional pain, but then you've got to get it approved, right? So it's got to go. It might need to go through procurement, or it needs to go through the senior management, and so you still need. I'm not dismissing the need for being able to prove. For us, the pain points for us is we're not generating enough pipeline, and I'm not meeting my target, and that's painful if you're a salesperson whose commission is reliant on that. But they're not going to sign it off unless I can show proof points that say, look, when we do this and we do this, it generates a 3x uplift. And we can show this for this industry and this industry. And suddenly now, when they go to their senior management and go, look, this is our problem, they can speak passionately about it. It's the emotional pain that they're feeling. But I've got my proof points. Look, it's going to generate this much return.
Would you say that the main differentiator between you and someone else who would conduct an interview would be the length through which you approach the interview? Because my understanding from all discussion we're having is that the way it looks like the way you approach the interaction is that you already have this kind of assumptions that, okay, he will be talking about his business interest, so whatever he's saying will be on this line of action. So is it how you function? Is it how you process the information?
It's a common mistake. You go in with a hypothesis in the back of your mind. I've known for a long time that if you ask the question in a certain way, you will get the answer that you want. So you can design any piece of research that will give you the exact answer that you want. Most experienced marketers know that, and it makes it very difficult for you to interpret research.
Even most lawyers also do know that. So
yeah.
So that's the kind of a trick, that because you always start with this point that you can kind of lead to whatever answer you want. You kind of, what's your process then to approach?
Well,
talking to users?
my process is always to try and there are times when you need the specifics, but my process is always to try and let the person talk. So to ask questions that are open, that allows the person to be expansive and give their own opinions, rather than me saying something that directs them to the answer. So I generally try and keep it as broad as I possibly can, and then maybe give, if they're going off on a tangent, to then try and bring them towards the end. But especially in startups, it's a dangerous game to only build your business based on what the customer wants.
I would like to focus now on our last part of this episode. We talked about building product, talking to you there. I'd like to talk now about growing.
Yep.
Can you share some of the effective practical strategies you have used to scale your products?
Yes. And I've used lots of different strategies, because I think when it comes to scale, first and foremost, everything's about people. So the base level is it's about people. When you're scaling a business, you're trying to grow a business, it's about getting the right people in at the right time. So
it's teamwork.
So it's teamwork to a degree. That's the first thing. If you don't get that right, then nothing else works. And in startups, one bad hire can set you back a significant period. It can even kill the business. So that's consistent across all the different businesses. If you are in B2B and you're selling to enterprise, then clearly sales is important, and your growth strategy is about identifying I talked a bit about this already, that emotional pain, but then that journey through and what that process looks like. And the difficulty in the early stage of the startup it's called product market fit, right? Is figuring out what is it that you have that the market wants in a way that is consistent. It's very easy, and you should do this at the early stage of a business, to go to your prospect and to talk during the sales pitch in a completely different way to the way you just 5 minutes ago talked to another prospect. That's okay at the very earliest stages of the business. You're trying to figure out what message is going to land and what message is going to work. But you can't build an exponentially growing tech business if every customer has got a different sales pitch. You have to find the messaging that you can repeat over and over again, that then allows you to close deals in a predictable way.
So my understanding from what you said is the way to grow is to automate your selling process.
It's not necessarily about automate. In the B2B world, selling to enterprise, there's always going to be people involved still today. But those people need training. So those people need to understand, what is the message? What do I say at this point? What do I say at that point? What is the path through to closing this customer? And so it's consistency more than automation. And then marketing ties into that as well. So having consistent messaging
is being consistent.
Yeah. So the same message that I say to this company is the same message I say to this company, is the same message I say to this company. 95%, say, is the same. You obviously have some nuance. This company might be, you have to listen to the company's problems, and there's some nuance there. But generally, you need a sales process. And we did this very effectively at Silverpop, where we knew exactly what it was that companies were looking for as an email marketing platform. What were the pain points? What was the sales process going to look like? And more, I was on the marketing side. What was the marketing messaging that we were going to take to market that would drive those companies to then engage with our sales teams?
So 2 keywords to grow: team and consistency.
Yeah.
If we focus a bit more on team, I would like to wrap up on this one. How do you build? I know it's a very open question, and maybe I should rephrase it, but there is not a shortage of people having engineer in their CV or lawyers, or you see what I mean? Like, especially in London. However, I find finding the right fit is so hard. How do you do that?
Remember I said I always have half a dozen ideas at any one moment in time. The only reason none of those ideas happen is because of people. I like to start businesses with the right people. And they don't happen because I haven't yet met the right people for those businesses to actually occur. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Solo founders, or founding a business on your own, is really difficult. It's difficult enough with 2 or 3 founders. Being on your own is much harder. So for those that are on their own, one of the first things that I always say to do is to build a group of people around you who can advise and support your journey. So that's nothing to do with on-the-ground execution of the business. That's to do with you being able to throw ideas back and forth, to get somebody to turn around to you and say, look, you need to have a break now, or you need to look at this instead because you're so laser focused on something. All those sorts of things are important in that early stage. When you do start to build your team, who you hire varies dramatically, right? So, and it depends on the situation. So again, from a startup perspective, if you're building a tech platform, you need to have tech people within the business. You can't build IP in the business if you've outsourced your tech. So you need that inside the business. It may be because of cost that you have to outsource for the MVP and then prove that and then bring tech people in. Again, it depends on the situation. And then the other big thing I learned was hiring senior people too early is extremely risky.
Why?
They're expensive. The things that attract you to them are the very things that make them actually probably not the right fit for a startup. So for example, they have succeeded at building a startup before. So they understand the startup space, big tech. They've grown a team and grown a successful department, big tech. But they've done that. Are they the type of person who can come in and do that again on repeat? It's hard to build a startup. You have to be on the ground. You typically start on your own. You typically don't get a huge amount of funding with which you can go and build or hire a large team. The senior people typically have got to the point where they're managing teams. They're not doing the day-to-day anymore. Can they actually do the day-to-day that you need them to do? And you're going to pay them an awful lot of money to come and do that. Often I found it's better to hire somebody on a part-time basis, maybe a small amount of time, so fractional CMO or fractional sales leader, and then hire somebody junior into the startup, more junior into the startup, who is hungry to learn, to get things done, who is going to be open to training. One of the best things, I remember my MD at Silverpop saying to me, we're not going to hire people who have been in the email marketing world inside the business to start with. And the reason for that was our approach to email marketing was different. In those days, email marketing was all about loading up a list to 1 million people and sending out the same message. We were all about tailoring the message, personalizing the message, being much more relevant to the recipient. And by hiring people who thought literally the opposite to the way we thought, meant we were going to have to retrain them. And retraining the way someone thinks is extremely difficult. But when someone is new, it's much easier to train them. So I always typically look to hire people who have got the characteristics that I'm interested in: curiosity, drive, ambition. I want them to succeed as much as I want the company to succeed.
I can feel a strong, because we have conducted a lot of interviews here at the podcast, and the feeling I've got with you, it's like your kind of strategy is very much people touch-based orientated. Like, my feeling is that, don't get me wrong, I don't doubt your underlying skills, but it just feels that the extra kind of USP that your personal is your ability to bring people in. It's literally leadership, I would say, but like in some sense, like bringing people in, putting them on the table, and getting the best out of them, and replicating this to the newer generation.
Yep.
And that's kind of the personal feeling I've got from your strategy. Everyone has a different one, but
yeah, the best startups that I've seen succeed have always had great people within the business, always. And the leaders have always known exactly how to get the best out of that team.
Can you share a couple of advice with our audience on that point? If I'm jumping on this podcast, listening to you, interested, impressed in some way, what were the mistakes you made and you'd like to share?
We've made lots of mistakes. Well, I've certainly made lots of mistakes. One of my biggest success stories is also one of my biggest failures. And I say me, there's a whole group of people involved in a business. But I was the CTO of that business. And we launched the first ever paid-for movie online. And it was done in partnership with the Film Council. Supposed to be a trial. We were testing. We didn't want many people to actually buy this video at that point. It was testing the technology. It was testing how much people would pay. And so we set up all the infrastructure. We were delivering probably close to 1 trillion ad impressions, or hundreds of billions of video impressions across the internet. So we weren't worried about our ability to deliver the video, but all the stuff around it was new. Paying for a video, looking at the analytics of tracking exactly how the user behavior was. All of this didn't really exist very much back then. And we went live, and the way we were going to attract the traffic to come and buy this was an appearance on the BBC at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that should generate enough traffic. They went on at 6. Unfortunately, BBC didn't get the message. They repeated it at 7. They repeated it at 8. ITV picked it up at 8. Went on ITV, Channel 4 picked it up. All the different media establishments picked it up. Appeared in the papers, the later editions of the papers that day across the UK. The East picked it up pretty quickly, so front page of the Hindu Times the following day. America picked it up. By 11 o'clock that morning, we were getting hundreds of thousands of people hitting our site. We built it for 500, maybe 1,000. And so that all sounds good, that all sounds successful, right? Not a failure at all. The failure happened because we hadn't planned for that situation at all. We didn't communicate effectively to the BBC, and the site went down. And the site went down.
Oh, now I understand. Okay.
The site went down within 30 seconds or a minute because there's so many people coming hitting the site.
Now it makes sense. Okay.
And the reason it went down, I won't name names, but the reason it went down was the company that we had used to do to process the payments, one of the world's biggest payment providers globally, knew it was a trial that we were testing, and therefore had decided without telling us that they were going to put that payment transaction through their next generation payment platform, which wasn't geared for more than 1,000 people. And so everybody could get to the site, they could see the thing, but then they clicked buy, couldn't buy, the whole thing collapsed. And so we got onto all the, it's the equivalent of getting onto Reddit today and all the rest online. You had all the tech guys attacking, coming at us, going, these guys are amateurs, and all the rest of it, right? And so dealing with all that, huge learnings. And that's the thing about making mistakes, is you learn so much from these mistakes, how to communicate when things go wrong, how to talk to partners, how to talk to the media. All of these things are things I learned from that.
But in this scenario, you couldn't have done anything differently, couldn't you?
We could have, so we planned for that. If we'd communicated better to the BBC, we could have kept it.
But because the issue was with your payment provider.
Yep.
So it's their mistake, not yours.
Sure, but we own it. We're the ones who brought them in. Yes, we can sit there and blame the payment provider, but we built it so that in case it went viral, we did viral video. We knew things go viral straight away. We built it so if it did go viral, we would be okay. We assumed that all our partners would think in the same way.
Oh, okay.
We didn't. who didn't communicate.
Communication.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Riaz, for giving us your time. Don't forget to subscribe. We're gonna regularly post updates. Riaz, how can people find you?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I spend all my time there, so do a search for my first name, last name there, connect with me there. I'm usually really responsive. So
we're gonna put a link in the bio, and I'll see you next.